Hi, welcome to Chapter 12, Section 1 here. We're covering the Second War of Independence and the upsurge of nationalism. It's a good name that they gave it for the War of 1812 since that's such a terrible name. Today, we're going to be covering the first section on to Canada, over lakes and land, or land and lakes, to federal grievances. So, this is the Second War. This is a sequel between the United States and the British. Usually, sequels are bigger, badder, more grand, more explosions. This one's not as long or drawn out or as deadly as the American Revolution. So let's get into it. As people know, it is also called the War of 1812, which when our beloved Peyton Manning played for the Broncos instead of the Colts, he played Andrew Luck, the War of 1812, which I think Manning won the last one. I'm not sure, though. I can't remember. So, the Americans, we went to war against the British, Mr. Madison's War, as it's called, over neutrality rights, the impressment of our sailors, the stealing of our ships, the arming of the natives, and then the Confederacy under Tecumseh, and so we declare war in 1812, and we decide to invade Canada from Detroit. Which, a little geography quirk, you go south from Detroit to go to Canada. It's quirky. Canada kind of slides in underneath. They moved north from Niagara, and then they also crossed Lake Champlain. All of them were fought off by the Canadians. The United States has tried to invade Canada twice, and we have failed at it. In fact, most of the Canadians fighting this, and most of them, but a lot of them, were actually loyalists or Tories who fled the United States during the American Revolution, and they went to to Canada, and it's basically their kids. So it's a family feud. It's almost a civil war of sorts between the kids of the Revolution, the Patriots, and the children of the Tories. The Americans invaded the capital, York, which is modern-day Toronto, and burned their parliament. Keep that in mind because there might be some retribution coming for burning down the capital of Canada. The Americans then attacked by sea. They were a little more successful there. You have the USS Constitution, which is a frigate that was nicknamed Old Ironside because cannonballs seemingly just bounced off the sides of it. And privateers were used once again. We don't have a substantial army going against the British. We have Oliver Hazard Perry, who pictured here has Hazard as his middle name, baby. He captured a British fleet in Lake Erie at the Battle of Put-in Bay in September 1813. Also, General William Henry Harrison, Old Tippecanoe, his army overtook the British at Detroit and Fort Malden at the Battle of Thames in October 1813, and at this, Tecumseh was killed. And it looks like the war is actually going pretty well for America to start. Even though we didn't successfully invade Canada, we're winning on the seas. They're defeating Tecumseh and some of the British armies there in Detroit. The problem is the British are fighting with one arm tied behind their back. Actually, maybe two hands tied behind their back because they're kind of fighting Napoleon. There's this whole giant war in Europe going on at the same time. So we're not getting the full front of the British force at the time. So you can look here at the map. You can see in August 1812 is when they attacked Detroit. The little yellow and blue are American victories. The Battle of the Thames. The Pan-Indian Alliance collapsed because of that. We tried to invade Canada a couple times, and that didn't work. We'll be talking about some other later ones here in a little bit. The British also will blockade the United States eventually. Here's the USS Constitution. It's currently in Boston Harbor. They take it out once a year on the 4th of July and let everyone see the boat. It still floats. It's a floating museum. It's pretty neat to go see Old Ironsides there in Boston. In 1814, Napoleon was defeated for the first time, and he was in exile after his grand army was defeated in Russia, and they marched back and lost hundreds of thousands of men. He is in exile, and so the British, not having to fight, Napoleon and his great armies, decide to take their full attention and attack the United States. And when they look at us and decide to really put it to us, we're in a lot of trouble. They unleash their full force on America. Thomas McDonald, that's a weird name, sorry. He was a naval officer who's forced the invading British army near Plattsburgh to retreat on September 11th, 1814. So initially, there's a little bit of success, even though it's not going to go very well. He saved Upper New York from British conquest at the Battle of Plattsburgh. The big thing, though, is the British then decide to attack the nation's capital. Back then, it was a big deal to attack and take the capital of the country, to basically get them into submission, to get them to quit, to get them to sign an armistice because their government would be in exile. So in August 1814, they marched in. They burned the Capitol. They burned the presidential mansion. President Madison had to flee. He actually took part in a battle. He fired some cannon at the British. He's the only acting president to ever take part in a battle. His wife, Dolly, saved some precious paintings, some documents from the White House. The White House, or not the White House at this point, but the presidential mansion and the Capitol, the whole Capitol would have burned if it weren't for a freak storm that hit. Simultaneously, a hurricane and a tornado hit Washington, D.C., ending the battle, scattering the British, and putting out the fires. I didn't make that up. A hurricane and a tornado hit at the same time in Washington, D.C. of all places, extinguishing the fires and scattering the British armies, and saving the presidential mansion and the Capitol from total ruin. They did have to rebuild the presidential mansion. They gave it a coat of whitewash, and eventually becomes the White House as we know it, although Theodore Roosevelt was the first president to coin the term the White House, but it had to be rebuilt. For Americans who believed in divine intervention and signs from above, this was a sign that God wanted Americans to win. It was a sign that God favored the American cause. And later on, when we get into things like Manifest Destiny, that there's a mission from God for the United States to spread our awesome ways and our Americanness and lift up uncivilized people, here's some evidence. I mean, the British were going to beat us and burn our capital, and yet a hurricane and a tornado hit on the same day. It's very bizarre. The Weather Channel would just explode today if that ever happened again. They'd be like, whoa! So a little strange thing that happened, a little weather phenomenon. At the same time, they then march up north after they reconnoiter and they attack Baltimore. 13,000 Americans were barricaded at Fort McHenry. They withstood the bombardment all through the night. A prisoner on a British ship off the coast of Fort McHenry named Francis Scott Key witnessed the entire battle and was astounded in the following morning of all the bombardment that the American Star-Spangled Banner was still flying. So inspired by it, he wrote a 4-verse poem, which became eventually our national anthem. We in America, we sing only the first verse, and in true American fashion, I'm not sure if it's true American fashion, we set it to the tune of an English drinking song, which makes sense. I mean, if you really want to sound okay, the Star-Spangled Banner is really hard to sing. I love America, I love our song, but maybe we need to be a little inebriated. Maybe not. We love our country. We shouldn't make fun of our national anthem. It's just hard to sing. Some of those notes, when I sing it, it's written by Francis Scott Key. When I sing it, it's Francis Scott off key. Enough about singing. Let's move on. So the Star-Spangled Banner, the Americans hold firm. They win at Fort McHenry. And the British kind of question, why are they fighting? Neutrality is a dead issue. Napoleon is gone. So here's some pictures. Here's some of the cannons that are still around Baltimore. Yes, that's me wearing a Wu-Tang shirt. Wu-Tang ain't nothing to mess with. Here's a Fort McHenry. You can go visit it. It's a national park, modeled after the original one. The original Star-Spangled Banner, the actual flag, is massive. They have it in the Smithsonian. They've updated it. Sadly, over the years, souvenir hunters have cut pieces off of it. But if you go to one of the Smithsonians in Washington, D.C., you can just take in how large this flag was. Here's a political cartoon of the British burning our stuff and the debate over the war that's going on. Madison was forced into a humiliating withdrawal from the Capitol. So poor little Madison. And it is ironic, the smallest president in history is the only one to ever actually take part in a battle while president. The movie Independence Day wasn't real for all you that are curious. This is some artist renditions of what happened to the White House or the presidential mansion after the fires. Some paintings of some of the battles going on. Upper right, you have a painting of the British burning in D.C. And now we have a History Channel, computer-generated recreation of it because we have technology. Jackson, fresh off a victory over the Native Americans at the Battle of Horseshoe Bend, assembled an eclectic force to defend the southern coast from the British. He has natives, he has blacks, he has Creoles, he has Southerners, he has a medicine man from New Mexico. I made that one up. He has Klingons, I'm not sure. And at the Battle of New Orleans, or Nolens from the south, on January 8th, 1814, Andrew Jackson scored a stunning victory over the British. So stunning and so thorough was this defeat. I mean, the British were fighting through a swamp. Jackson chose to land very wisely that Jackson becomes a war hero. He gets the nickname Old Hickory because he's tough like hickory wood, which is what they make baseball bats out of traditionally. 333 American casualties were suffered in this battle, 2,459 for the British. The ironic twist of this is poor communication. The battle did not need to be fought. This peace treaty was already signed a month before in Ghent, Belgium. But they didn't know about it, so the battle was fought. The Americans win the final battle, and so America gets the sense that, hey, we beat the British again. When actually it's just a tie. They just decided to end the war. There was one battle that went on and nobody knew about. They didn't know the war was over, and Jackson won this huge, huge battle to battle Nolens. Becomes a hero, sets his political career on course, leading eventually to become the 7th president. We'll come back to this Andrew Jackson character. He's a little different. So here's a painting of the Battle of Horseshoe Bend with it looks like we got some pirates and some just hodgepodge kind of guys fighting. You have Jackson standing up front, fighting and defeating the British, trying to storm New Orleans, if you're a Yankee. Here's Andrew Jackson's actual uniform. He's very svelte. He's not as big as Washington. Pretty cool uniform, though. So another map of what's going on. You can see our attempts to invade Canada. You have the British attempts to invade upstate New York. The Battle of Plattsburgh stopped that. You have the British advance to take Washington, D.C., but they failed at Baltimore. And then you have the final battle at New Orleans in January 8th, 1815, where the British tried to invade the South, but Andrew Jackson and his forces turned them away. So Tsar Alexander I of Russia, wait, I thought we were fighting Britain. What? Russia called the Americans and British to come to peace because he didn't want a British ally to lose strength in Americans in Americas to let Napoleon take over. Napoleon was beaten, but he wasn't totally defeated. There was a chance Napoleon could come back because they wanted Britain to focus themselves on, hey, if something happens, we need you. This, by the way, is a painting of Alexander I, the Tsar, which is Russian for Caesar, that is housed in one of the palaces in St. Petersburg. Kind of cool looking guy. Outfit's a little similar to Andrew Jackson's, actually. And so the Treaty of Ghent was signed on December 24th, 1814 in Belgium. Usually they sign everything in treaty, but, in Paris, but with the whole French Revolution and Napoleon, they didn't want to go to Paris. Merry Christmas, war's over. But, you have that final battle afterwards. John Quincy Adams and Henry Clay went to Ghent for the signing. Both sides stopped fighting. They conquered, and the conquered territory was restored. There's no mention of neutrality rights. Neutrality rights are dead. Impressment issue is dead. There's nothing mentioned about Native Americans being armed by the British. They just decide maybe we should stop fighting. And this really ushers in, pretty soon decades of peace and friendship, which turns into centuries of friendship and an alliance between the British and the Americans. The British were preoccupied with the Congress of Vienna more than the American War, trying to settle the European peace. Yes, Napoleon comes back from St. Helena, or Elba the first time, and he assembles his army, has 100 days of ruling, and then he's defeated at the Battle of Waterloo, and then he is shipped to St. Helena, where he dies of stomach cancer, although some people believe he was poisoned. So, America in all in the war, we lost 2,260 people were killed, 4,505 were wounded, 15,000 Americans died of disease, possibly. They don't have exact figures at the time. America spent $105 million on this war, but there's a huge surge in patriotism and pride. Nationalism grows for the first time because Americans are convinced they won this war. They failed to invade Canada. Our capital was burned for retribution for us burning theirs. We didn't really gain any land, but we won the last battle. We won the battle in New Orleans, so give it to us, America. We beat the British again, 2-0 against Britain. Woo-hoo! The British suffered 1,600 dead, 3,679 wounded. They had 3,221 died of disease. They spent about the same amount of money as America. They did free 3,000 slaves in a very similar fashion in the American Revolution, basically saying, if you join our side, we'll let you be free. They did eventually pay $1.2 million in damages for those lost slaves, something they did not do in the American Revolution. This deal was mediated by Alexander I, the Tsar of Russia. Natives were the real losers of the war. Without the ally of the British, the natives were in trouble, and it's really going to be a slow descent into being removed by the Americans moving into their lands. They were no longer supplied with weapons from the British to stop American migration. So this war really between America and Canada over, and we're pretty good friends now. Eh? So New England prospered during the war. Hang on just a moment. Illegal trade with Canada and a lack of British goods blocked until 1814 led them to build a lot of industry, build a lot of factories themselves. Trading with Canada was kind of suspect since we're at war with them, but they made money on that. During this time, Massachusetts, Connecticut, and Rhode Island met in 1814 in Hartford for a secret meeting to discuss their disgust and grievances against the war. What this turns into is near treason, and there's talks of secession, and basically this is the death of the Federalist Party. 26 delegates meet on when it seemed likely that New Orleans would fall to the British. It looked like they were going to lose. There's no way that we can stop the British at New Orleans. They meet, they write up their grievances. Here's the problem with this war. Here's the problem with Mr. Madison. Here's the problem with the Democratic Republicans. And then New Orleans was won by America. And these guys seem very anti-American, very unpatriotic. This is a political cartoon of the Hartford Convention, leap or no leap. Should we jump? Should we bail? Should we go back to the British? Here's the War of 1812. Actually, the election of 1812. Madison won pretty easily. So the final report of the Hartford Convention demanded financial assistance from Washington to compensate for the lost trade from the embargoes. They wanted constitutional amendments requiring a 2/3 vote for Congress to embargo to be imposed, for new states to be admitted, because a lot of southern states were being brought in, and for war to be declared. Possibly some very good ideas. The president could only serve one term. They actually proposed shorter term limits for the president. They wanted to abolish the 3/5 clause, which gave artificial power to the South. They wanted the prohibition of the election of two successive presidents from the same state, since you've got Jefferson and then Madison from Virginia. Few took it serious because of the stunning victory at New Orleans and the Treaty of Ghent. Like I said, it made them seem un-American, unpatriotic. They did bring up some really good points. There's some good things in there that maybe even Americans could consider today as constitutional amendments, but they seemed unpatriotic, petty, treasonous, and they just seemed like sour losers. They're crying sour grapes. And the Hartford resolutions really marked the death of the Federalist Party. Because of this, they looked like they committed treason against their own country. There was some mention and whispering of secession from the Union, but it doesn't come to fruition. The official report doesn't have that. It was debated, but the official report, because it came on the heels of a big victory for the United States, the Federalist Party nailed their own coffin shut, and they go bye-bye. Bye, Federalist. So we're going to stop there for today. Hope you had a good time. Hope you learned something. If you have any questions or comments, please put them in the comments. Have a good evening.